in this time-lapse video, I am going to be making a custom cutting board. And I guess I'll just narrate through. So to start off, I am taking a bunch of pieces of wood that I have and lining them up to try and figure out what kind of order I want to glue this thing up in. So some of the pieces had some pretty rough edges, so I took it over to my joiner and ran it through to smooth out those edges so it's much easier for when I get up to the gluing part of the process. And then next I moved over to my chop saw, and I had measured out all the pieces so that they're about the same length, and I cut them down to size so it'd make it a little bit easier to line them all up together once I get them over onto my table. And there's Miss Luna, my supervisor. So once I had everything cut down to size and the sides are all smooth, I brought out my clamps and set up my pieces of wood. Kind of went through, made sure I had them in the order that I wanted them in, and then I got out my wood glue and I put some gloves on and a little brush. And I like to put the glue in a cup, makes it a little easier to do this whole process. So I typically will just paint the glue on one side of the piece and then start to sandwich them all together as I go down the line. And if anyone's wondering, the types of wood that I used are maple, walnut, and some cherry, all in varying widths to give it some more interest. So once I have all the pieces glued together, I slowly start to sandwich it all down and tighten the clamps. And while I'm tightening the clamps, I'm also trying to make sure that all of the pieces line up on the underneath so that one side is completely flush and I don't have to adjust anything. And then I'll make sure that the board is level after I take them out of the clamps. And then I like to take a damp rag and wipe off all the excess glue that got squeezed out as I was tightening it down. I like to flip it over and do both sides and make sure it's nice and clean for the next steps. And then I will actually let this sit overnight just to make sure that the wood glue is completely dry. So the next day I came in and I removed the clamps, and underneath where all the clamps were I couldn't get to the glue drips. So I'll take a hand scraper and just kind of go over and do my best to remove the big chunks of glue that were left behind. It's important to do this because if you're going to run this through a planer next, which I am, those wood chunks can actually chip and damage your blades on your planer. So now that the chips are off or the chunks of glue are gone, I take it over to my planer and try to get a rough size of the thickest part of it. And then I slowly start to run it through, and in small increments I lower the blade down and take more and more layers of wood off until it finally starts to level out. And then once it's all the same thickness, nice and smooth, I can move on to the next part of the process, which I actually noticed that there was a couple loose knots in one of the pieces in the board, and I didn't want them to fall out later after washings and use. So I just took a little wire tool and picked out all the loose knot, which actually ended up going all the way through the pieces of wood. So I decided that I would fill them with a food grade resin and mica powder. And for this I chose to go with a blue color, which I thought was really pretty, and it'll give it a fun little pop of color in all of the natural brown tones. So I put masking tape on the other side so it wouldn't leak all the way through, and then let that cure for a couple hours. once it was all cured, I took my sander and went over and sanded all the excess off on both sides and made sure the board itself was nice and smooth. And some of the stuff that I didn't show in this part was I actually took it over to my chop saw again and took any excess off the edges that were sticking out just to make sure those were nice and straight and even. And then I also hand sanded around the edges to make it more comfortable to the touch. So next, I got my brands out and a torch, and I heated up my brands for my small business and wood burned my logo into the cutting board, which I always think is kind of a cool process to watch. And then to get rid of the scorch marks, I sanded over it a little bit off the dust, and you can see my logo. Lastly, my absolute favorite part about making things is being able to put the finishing coats on it, because it brings out all the beautiful colors of that piece of wood and all the character comes out. So for this part, because it's a cutting board, I like to use a mix of beeswax and mineral oil, and it works wonderfully for cutting boards as it helps keep the water from soaking into the wood when you wash it or cutting things on it, and the beeswax kind of makes that last longer, and it works wonders for your cutting boards. Plus it is completely food safe, which you need. So that is pretty much my whole process. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know what you think. If you feel like I should keep making these videos or not, I would greatly appreciate hearing from you and what you think. So I guess I'll see you guys next time.